Okay, so the question is village or villa versus cottage. Which one's better? And at a glance, the villa is giving double the coin output, um, double the recharge cycle, and also lower population, which you need the population early on. But as your city gets developed, you don't really need the surplus population. It just causes you to um, plant more happiness providers. So the lower population on villa is actually a good thing. At a glance, villa seems like a better investment. But the assumption in that question is that you only have four squares to plant one or the other. So the key variable here isn't necessarily the production of each. It's the key variable is the space that you have. Because if you have eight available squares, a pair of cottages is actually a better investment than a single villa. You just need more space to do it. But a pair of cottages is actually half the cost. It only costs 12,500 coin and 50,000 supplies. So half the cost of the villa gives the same 200 per recharge as a pair. The advantage with cottage though is it only takes an hour to build. So unless you're rushing your villas, the the better efficiency on actions in coin, you're not going to see the benefit of that for the first 10 hours until it's actually established. And then after 10 hours, you'll start getting the action benefit of it, but you won't even get the coin return until 20 hours. Whereas cottage builds in an hour, so you don't need to rush it. It'll just be ready for your upcoming collection. So if the key variable here is space, let's look at what would interfere with the space to have a pair of cottages versus being compelled to plant a villa because you're confined for space. Obviously, the main space restriction is the sum of your other production buildings, farms, other houses. If you have a military barracks, this is a archery camp. Just the basic elements of the city. But the non-productive space that's consumed is your happiness providers as well as attack. And that's what I really want to focus on. Um, so in the earlier levels, obviously the goal is to ramp up your production with farms and houses, things like that. Print troops as needed or goods for expansions. But then as you get into the higher levels, we want to start filling in these empty spaces with attack ability, right? So that we can be more effective on the map. Let's jump over to the map real quick and check out the fighting there. So this is difficulty level 7. Let's throw in a couple archers for that. Getting some injuries, no catastrophic failure yet. There's one archer. I lose ballistas occasionally, but for the most part, the troops that I'm burning up are archers. Just an injury. So we've had one dead archer so far. 2. Just injured. Not bad, right? And remember, this is a boss node on difficulty level 7. So I lost 2 archers, used up most of my actions. Let's jump back over to the settlement and talk about cottage versus villa now. So after your city is completed on the production side, you're going to end up with these little pockets around the city, right? These little 1x1 gaps. And there's this temptation to fill these in with towers as soon as you have the extra resources and the happiness to justify it. There's that temptation, right? Might as well get ahead of the attack game and make the fighting easier. If I'm losing troops, I mean, I only lost 2 archers, but if I'm losing any troops, it's potentially a waste of resources. So I might as well make them stronger, right? That's the thinking. I just planted an arch, so that'll provide the happiness to justify 9 monuments or 3 aqueducts, however you want to do it. But that'll give me the happiness to justify 9 squares worth of attack ability. Looking at my flat mode, I also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11. I have 11 empty squares. So I have the happiness to justify nine monuments. I have the resources for that, and I have the space to do that. So why not hurry up and plant a couple monuments? And this is ultimately the answer to the question villa versus cottage. If I start with a 20 by 20 grid and, a couple farms, a few villa, and then fill everything else with arches and attack ability to the point where I only have a 4 by 4 space left, then villa is the correct answer. But the variable here, like I said, isn't so much the production of one versus the other. The variable is the space that you have available. So if you're planning these monuments prematurely, you're not necessarily comparing the production of this. You're comparing the wasted space of planting monuments before you need them, where you could have planted 2 cottages instead. Remember, same output, half the cost, builds in an hour. Obviously, every city is different depending on your main city strength. So when you actually need to plant these monuments is just going to depend on your own personal city strength. So that's going to be a different answer for everyone, whether it's level 7 or level 4 that you're planning those monuments. Just depends on the individual player. But the concept is the same for everyone. If you're planning monuments before your city needs them, you're wasting space that could otherwise be used for production. Now, if you're willing to rush villa every time you construct it, that's probably that's going to be a better production option. But remember, it costs double the resources, and if you do choose to rush those, which I tried one season and I didn't really see the return on that. I didn't generate as many shards from the map to justify as many as I spent rushing villas. So I don't think the return on investment is there with shards. I mean, if you're willing to buy shards and rush whatever you want, be my guest, plant all the villas that you want. But if you're trying to be conservative with your shards and your diamonds, planning villa, it's not cost effective to rush it. So planning it, just assume that it's going to be non-productive for the first 10 hours, right? So if you aren't inclined to rush it, a pair of cottages is more cost effective, first of all, and gives the same action output effective within an hour of planning it. So you get an extra 9 hours worth of action generation out of the pair of cottages. And it's not like over time villa will surpass that. It's the same 200 per collection or per recharge cycle on either option. So it's not like villa will pass a pair of cottages after a few days. They'll always be equal on coin output as well as action production. So here's where the space thing comes in. I have 11 empty squares, right? I don't need ballistas right now. I'm not killing them. Every now and then I'll lose one, but for the most part what I'm killing is archers. So I have an archery camp. I didn't rush it, I let it cook. I'm going to print a few cycles of troops out of it and then just slide it down to that disconnected pocket and plug a tile house in here. And this new swap thing is kind of handy for, like, I can leave the tile house planted and then just cycle this in at any point if I need troops. Pretty cool feature there. So I now have 7 empty squares, right? And I don't need ballistas, but let's say I did. That's 4 by 3 is 12 squares. I had 11 empty squares before I planted the tile house. So let's say I need ballistas now. And like I've got 10 left and can't fight. If everything in my city was already filled up, all these empty squares, around the city, the 7 empty squares that I had, if I'd already filled those with monuments, and this was a cottage or a villa, I would have a really hard time making space for ballista camp, right? But by leaving those empty squares, you can actually maintain your production without you don't have to delete anything in order to get troops. So here's how that would look. I mean, roads are cheap, but if you start deleting a lot of them, it does add up, right? I now have a 4x3. Um, so I'd have to delete one tile house and one piece of road in order to get a ballista in there. Rush the ballista if you want. Otherwise, your timers are going to be off by an hour, but you don't have to. You could let it cook and just let your timers be an hour off if you wanted. But that's how that would look. So the benefit here of leaving that empty space, instead of just automatically plugging it with towers as soon as you are able to, the benefit here is that I can print ballistas whenever I need it, without compromising the total collection value of my city. So back to the question, cottage versus villa. The underlying question there is, how much space are you actually competing with? Like, if you didn't have these empty squares where you could shuffle in a ballista camp, um, without deleting a whole bunch of hardware, you can just plug a ballista camp in, grab a few extra troops, and then shift your roads back into position. If you didn't have that free space to do that, villa versus cottage is a different question at that point. And the foundation of this question starts on day one when you first design your settlement. You can go for the villa as soon as possible because it's more efficient per tile, right? But remember, it's also double the cost to construct. So the other option is to use the resources that you're saving by planning cottages. You can use those surplus resources to generate more expansions, right? So instead of trying to be cost effective on a small grid, by planning a really expensive building on a small grid, plant the cheap buildings on a larger grid, and then once you do reach the end game, go ahead and plant a couple villas, right? I have 5 villas. I didn't rush any of them, and I planted them when I had enough surplus resources to just spend on something, right? Okay, let's throw a few villas in there. But it wasn't a necessity at the beginning. Like, I have to plant a villa as soon as possible because it's more efficient on space. That was never the impetus. For most of the season, for most of the initial setup, I just had tile houses and cottages, right? And these 5 villas were tile houses, so I didn't delete a cottage to upgrade it into a villa. I just had mostly cottages, 5 tile houses. Reach a point in the development where it's like, okay, delete the 5 tile houses, plug in some villa, and just cruise. So the other advantage with cottage comes in the very end game. Once I do start hitting that wall with attack ability where my troops just aren't strong enough anymore, so I do need to start planning some decorations. Well, now we can fill in these empty spaces. There's 7 monuments, and if that's not enough, now we can sell a cottage. And there's 4 extra squares for monuments, plus it'll just the act of selling the house frees up some of the happiness that I need to do that as well. The advantage here is that selling a cottage is a lot easier on your pocketbook than selling a villa. It costs less, first of all, and I have 10 extra hours worth of production out of it, coin production as well as action production, versus a villa where, if you plan it, you only have it for 3 days. The first day doesn't count because you don't get to collect anything, and then delete it 3 days later. That kind of stings, right? But deleting a cottage after using it to generate coins for 6 days really doesn't hurt my feelings. So remember, the root question here isn't necessarily production value of villa compared to cottage, apples to apples. The real question here is production value based on space. So if you have, this would be 4x2, and you fill this with decorations. I mean, villa's kind of your only option at that point. But if you hold off on the decorations, plant 2 cottages, and just maintain your coin collection for as many days as you can until you actually need those decorations, you can actually delete 1 cottage. So now you have half of a villa essentially. But for the like you can't delete half of a villa, right? But if you use a pair of cottages and just maintain that coin collection for 4 or 5 days and then delete half of your villa in favor of decoration, much better use of space. So big picture strategy here. You guys watched me do some fighting, so my troops are able to survive. At this point, there's really nothing to upgrade or change about my development. I could upgrade some more cottages into villa, but there's really no reason to. I'm generating plenty of coin, and don't really need to spend it on anything. I'm going to print a few archers this collection, but I'm not going to use this entire stash on archers. I really only need to print like 30 of them, and just leave the archery camp disconnected. So if I do need to print more tomorrow, I can shuffle it in, print 10 more, and just move it back into roadless area. So big picture here, and when you reach this point is going to depend on the individual player, like I said. But once you reach the point in your settlement where your settlement is completed, and it might be 4 goat farms and 4 villas, whatever your completed settlement looks like. If you are able to continue fighting on the map without needing extra attack boost, if you're still able to do that, use your remaining space for tile houses, butchers, cottages, whatever. Just use that available real estate for more production. Save your production, as much of it as possible. Grab a few expansions if you want. Like if I really don't need to print ballistas, I might as well spend these resources on another expansion. Let's see what my 400 essentially. So I could easily grab another expansion and then print 10 batches of archers, right? And wouldn't affect my budget. I stop at 10 expansions. I buy 3 with shards and then the rest with goods. And I've been stopping at 10. I think that's the kind of the sweet spot. There's really no reason in the old system when you could donate resources on the higher levels of the map. Not only could donate, but there was a lot of pinch points. Like you had to donate coin or goods to get through certain nodes. In that old system, it did make sense to get 12 or 13 expansions and just continue scaling up your production. But in this newer system where it's mostly fight oriented, 10 expansions is the sweet spot. Upgrade your production as much as possible within the first few days, but then spend the last 4 or 5 days focusing on attackability, right? When you make that transition is going to depend on the individual player, but that is the long-term strategy. So again, planning decorations prematurely, 1, 2, 3, 4 decorations, creates a competition between space that I'm using for production versus space that would be used for attackability. And that's where the villa has some appeal. But if I don't make this transition prematurely, the 8 squares for a pair of cottages, like I said, better use of space. And for the next 3 or 4 days, until I actually need attackability, I can just maintain that collection. And I don't need to spend anything. I'm going to print 10 batches of troops. There's 200,000. I'll still have 300,000 left over and just stockpile it. So by the time I do need additional attackability, I'll have 1 million in coin stockpiled, nothing to spend it on, delete a cottage. So at this point, it costs half of a villa, like I said, builds faster. So by the time I delete it, in order to plant 4 decorations, I've already gotten my return off of that investment. If I have 1 million in coin just stockpiled and nothing to spend it on, I've already gotten the return on my investment with a cottage. So I usually start making that transition like Friday night. I'll delete a few houses, consolidate the roads, shift my farm a little bit, and plant some more decorations and arches underneath it. Delete a couple houses, shift the farm, plant another arch, and some monuments underneath it. And I start making that transition usually Friday night, Saturday morning, and just kind of gradually. Oh, okay, I lost 3 ballistas that last round, so I probably need more attackability. I have plenty of troops at this point. Usually by Saturday, I'll have a stockpile of about 200 of each legionnaire, ballista, and archer. Legionnaires maybe 100. I don't use or kill those as often. So I'll have plenty of troops. If I lose 3, I don't necessarily need to print more troops. I just need to make them stronger. Okay, delete 2 houses, plug in an arch and some more monuments. So gradually, my city grid is going to end up looking, more like this, gradually. But until I actually reach the point where I need that, I'm not competing with space on the inside of that. So until I actually reach this point, I've been getting the return on investment for these cheaper production buildings for 4 or 5 days by the time I actually start adding blue. Whereas if you start with this boundary in your city, if you start with that and you're looking at a grid like this, going, wow, what's the most cost-effective production building that I can plant in this smaller chunk of real estate, then yeah, you're kind of compelled into a villa at that point. So that's my opinion on cottage versus villa. I've done another video on butcher, tailor, and farm. Tailor is the intermediate upgrade on the supply side, obviously, and I don't think it's cost effective. I don't plan them. I don't recommend planting them. On the supply side, just either butcher or straight to farm as soon as you have enough resources to do that. But on the coin side, cottage is actually a pretty cost-effective source of production. So that's my opinion on cottage versus villa. Hope it's helpful, and I'll talk to you guys later.